The controversial former Chief Justice of Alabama Supreme Court defeated Senator Luther Strange for the Republican nomination for Jeff Sessions' old Senate seat. That's according to the Associated Press. Moore is now the heavy favorite to win the general election, despite the fact that President Trump traveled to the Yellowhammer State to personally campaign for Senator Strange. Let's now go to Fox News correspondent Jonathan Serry. He's in Montgomery at Roy Moore's campaign headquarters. Celebratory mood there, I assume.
It is indeed an enthusiastic crowd, and they have been all night. But when they got the results, when they heard that Roy Moore was the projected winner, they erupted in applause. Moore himself arrived here about 2 hours ago, already displaying a very confident demeanor, going around the entire room, shaking hands before retiring to a back room to watch the returns that all night were showing him with a consistent lead over Luther Strange. We are expecting him to come out momentarily and deliver his victory speech within a matter of minutes. Right now, supporters rallying the crowd. Moore represents the populist wing of the Republican Party. Alabama's former Chief Justice gained notoriety among Christian conservatives back in 2003 when he had a Ten Commandments monument installed in the state Supreme Court building and then refused a federal court order to remove it. That ultimately cost him his job as Chief Justice, but he won the support of these religious conservatives who have followed him ever since, voting for him in race after race, and this one now appears to be the charm. Now, Roy Moore missed out on some key endorsements, and yet he came up with some workaround solutions. For example, the NRA endorsed his opponent Luther Strange, but at a recent rally, Roy Moore pulled out a revolver and explained to his supporters exactly where he stood on the Second Amendment. The crowd went wild. They eat this sort of stuff up. Also, Moore did not receive the endorsement of President Trump. However, several Trump loyalists, including Sarah Palin and Steve Bannon, supported Moore. Now, a lot of people have been portraying this election as a referendum on President Trump's influence. But in speaking with Moore supporters, they tell us, many of them tell us they still love President Trump, but they also love Roy Moore. So rather than this being a referendum on President Trump, this may be more of a referendum on the direction of the Republican Party. And at least here in Alabama, it is the populist wing that appears to have won out. Dana?
All right, Jonathan, it's always fun to be at the location where the candidate wins the election. It sounds like they're going to have a really good celebration tonight. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for that report. Let's go to Fox News correspondent Peter Ducey. He's at Senator Strange campaign headquarters in Birmingham. I have a feeling it might be a little quieter where you are, Peter.
It was really quiet a couple of minutes ago, Dana, when a very subdued Senator Luther Strange and his wife Melissa stood at a podium that's set up on a fireplace behind me in this hotel lobby to concede the election to Roy Moore. He said he had already called Moore and congratulated him, but the big headline is that Strange thanked President Trump, and he acknowledged that the president really stuck his neck out by picking one Republican over another, which is something that could enrage or at least upset half the party, which it does not necessarily seem to have yet in this case. But he thanked the president. He said that any political problems that the president has as a result of Strange's loss, he wants to take credit for. Strange wants credit for. He says it's all on him, but that he really appreciates the president and his loyalty as a friend. He thinks that they formed a bond as newcomers in D.C. The president, of course, got there in January. Strange got there in February. There are these flyers all around here. It shows Strange and the president. That was the main part of his pitch, that he was the president's endorsed pick, but it did not go Strange's way. It did not go the president's way. The president did say that if Strange lost, he'd come back to the state to campaign for the other guy. Now we wait to see exactly what that looks like. Dana.
Peter, let me ask you one thing, because it was a pretty bitter primary race leading up to tonight's result. But I understand that Luther Strange said that he pledges full support for Roy Moore and that he would, help him make sure that he wins the general election. Is that what you got from tonight's remarks?
Yes, and something really interesting, Dana. Strange mentioned that he knows there are a lot of different Republicans with different allegiances, and he described them as swirling passions in the Alabama Republican Party. They just didn't swirl his way tonight, but this was a fight between Strange, who was cast as basically somebody who's going to go and take marching orders from Mitch McConnell, even though he's only been there for 8 months, versus an outsider, Judge Roy Moore, who defies all authority over the course of his career. Of course, he's famous for not taking down a statue of the Ten Commandments that was at the State Judiciary building and then getting removed from the bench. So even though these two were trying to paint themselves as outsiders, it became the Trump candidate versus the outside candidate. And in this case, the outside candidate won, but he is apparently, if everything goes according to what we've been hearing, still going to get the support of the president and of the person who was defeated tonight, Luther Strange. Dana.
I think there's probably no doubt about that. Okay, Peter, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Earlier today, President Trump was asked about his harsh criticism of NFL players who refused to stand for the national anthem and what he's doing to help Puerto Rico recover from the devastation wrought by Hurricane Maria. Watch this.
I wasn't preoccupied with the NFL. I was ashamed of what was taking place because, to me, that was a very important moment. I don't think you can disrespect our country, our flag, our national anthem. I have plenty of time on my hands. All I do is work. We are totally focused on that. But at the same time, it doesn't take me long to put out a wrong, and maybe we'll get it right.
Joining us now for a reaction in Austin, Texas, is my former colleague in the Bush administration, Karl Rove. Karl, could we start with Alabama and get your take on the Senate race results tonight? I guess it probably in the last few days looked like Roy Moore was going to win it. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm in Dallas today, but I'll go to Austin if you want me to be reporting from there.
I love Dallas, too.
Sorry, go now?
No, please stay.
Okay, good. Full disclosure, I'm a volunteer with a super PAC that was supporting Luther Strange, and tonight Roy Moore won fair and square and whooped him well. And I thought Luther's concession speech was really sort of classy, and good for him. It is a testament to the sort of folk hero status of Judge Moore, who for 30 years has been a fixture in Alabama politics. Twice removed as Supreme Court Justice, first time as Peter Ducey pointed out in response to putting the 10 Commandments on the judicial building grounds. The other time for basically saying Alabama officials shouldn't live up to the requirements of the gay marriage Supreme Court decision. And this made him a very strong figure in the religious community, in the social conservatives, Christian conservatives, and you see that tonight. Virtually every rural county of Alabama is carried by Moore and by big margins. Strange's support is in Huntsville in the north and Birmingham and its suburbs in the center, and he runs reasonably well in the far southern part of the state around Mobile, but rural people came out to vote strongly for him. Focus groups that that the Super PAC American Crossroads Senate Leadership Fund ran. I was interested in those focus groups. People said, you know what, I know he shouldn't have done it, but I'm glad he stood up for our faith in that way. They removed him as a judge because he refused to abide by a court injunction in one case. But you know what? It shows where his heart is, and I want him to go to Washington. So tonight, a populist outsider who has been a fixture in politics in Alabama is going to Washington.
So I'm sure you're probably aware that last night Steve Bannon, who left the White House in August, whether he left or he was fired, I guess that depends on who you ask. General Kelly would say he was fired. But regardless, he maintains a good relationship with President Trump. And he campaigned last night for Roy Moore. And on Sean Hannity's show, of course, takes a shot at Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, whose popularity certainly is down, but also at you and other people involved in helping Luther Strange. And I wonder if you want to respond to that, because it seems to me that Republicans have got to figure out a way to work together going forward if President Trump's agenda is actually going to get accomplished.
Yeah. Look, he kept talking about my day of reckoning and others. That's, taunting that you get in the 7th grade schoolyard, so I'm not going to respond to it. But I think you do make a point. And we saw this in the run-up to the election. President Trump asked for support for Luther Strange. He didn't get it. I don't think that weakens him. I saw all of the mainstream media was portraying this as a test of Donald Trump, and if he lost, this would be, if Luther Strange lost, it would be a problem for Donald Trump. Every bit of evidence I saw was that Alabamians, no matter who they supported for president or for Senate, loved the president, and he was very popular in the state. And I think people said, you know what, I appreciate the president's advice, but I'm going to go for Roy Moore. And in a way, the people who opposed the president's choice are now going to have to sort of try to ingratiate themselves with the president. They better not be out there crowing about how they beat the president. They ought to be in there probably saying, Mr. President, what can we do to help advance your agenda?
Well, and they have a lot.
That's going to be it.
They have a lot on their plate, because I wanted to ask you about tomorrow. President Trump is going to go to Indiana. He will kick off. He has spoken about tax reform before, but tomorrow is like the real big kickoff, the official one. And health care has failed. The effort to repeal and replace Obamacare is basically done at this point. But tax reform, people feel a little bit more optimistic about. And I wonder if you share that optimism.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic, but in part I'm cautiously optimistic because they made such a mess of it on Obamacare. And that is to say that by losing on Obamacare, it really crystallizes in Republicans' minds in Congress they better get tax reform done, or what are they going to be able to go to the American people on next year? They can say, yeah, we got a good Supreme Court justice and we backed the president on energy and regulatory policy, but the big things that people were expecting them to do were repeal and replace Obamacare and reform the tax code. So they got it. If they can't get the first one done now, then go work on that second one. But let me remind you of one thing. They can come back and in the budget resolution create provisions that allow them to have reconciliation next year, during the coming fiscal year, so they have another bite at the apple on health care. But let's get tax reform done so that we have a victory. And
they better hope it's not a poison apple when they take that bite out of it.
Exactly.
If I could switch to the other topic, because for several days we've been talking about the NFL and the president taking them on. And I think politically for the president, this is probably a winner if you look at least the polls, but also with his base. And as this controversy goes on, the left, in my opinion, never misses an opportunity to overreact. Take a look at Sheila Jackson-Lee earlier today on the House floor.
Which of those children's mothers are a son of a bee? That is racism. You cannot deny it. You cannot run for it. And I kneel in honor of them. I kneel in front of the flag and on this floor. I kneel in honor of the First Amendment.
Now, she wasn't the only one to do that, and I do think that the SOB comment was way over the line. But what do you think the left is doing here? Are they playing right into the president's hand when it comes to this cultural issue?
Sure they are. Absolutely. Look, it is entirely natural. Every American, when they hear the opening notes of the Star-Spangled Banner, feels an impulse to stand and look for the flag and put their hand over their heart. When a flag passes us, in a parade down a street, it's instinctual. This is something that we do as Americans, as an expression of our patriotism, of our love of country. So, look, we all believe that everybody has a right to freedom of expression. So let them, if they want to, kneel. But the vast majority of Americans believe that is disrespectful to our flag, and they want people to show respect for our country. That flag is not a symbol of America's perfection. It's a symbol of America's imperfection, but the desire to continually make the country better. And it is when we respect the flag, we're showing a respect for the generations who have come before us, some of whom served in the military and gave the ultimate price, some of whom did not, but served our country well, maybe in big and important ways, like Martin Luther King, or important inventors. A lot of the people who served our country best are people who simply led good lives and made their neighbors, their friends, their communities better by being who they were. And that's what we do when we salute the flag. Having said that, I agree. The comment on Friday night was a mistake. Do not swear at the people who are exercising their freedom of expression, and don't call into question their parentage. It caused a lot of people to wince. And what my concern about this is the president, I think, missed an opportunity. If he had used some of the language that he had, for example, in his UN speech, which I thought was terrific, and said, you know what, we really do strive in America for the approval of history. And when we salute the flag, we not only honor those who come before us, but we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to make our communities and our states and our country even better in the future. And that's what I would hope Americans would remember when they think of this controversy. If he'd done that rather than just swearing at people, there were 6 NFL players the week before who took the knee. There were several hundred who did after the president made that comment on Friday night. I think it was a missed opportunity.
All right, Carl, always appreciate your thoughts. We'll see you soon.
You
and
bet.
get back to Austin when you can.
Oh, okay. Friday morning.
Okay, Carl, thanks. Directly ahead, Attorney General Jeff Sessions says that free speech is under attack. We'll tell you what that's all about when we come right back. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is fighting back against the crackdown on conservative free speech on campuses across the U.S. Here's what he said at Georgetown University earlier today.
Freedom of thought and speech on American campus are under attack. The American University was once the center of academic freedom, a place of robust debate, a forum for the competition of ideas. But it is transforming into an echo chamber of political correctness and homogeneous thought, a shelter for fragile egos. But who decides what is offensive and what is acceptable? The university is about the search for truth, not the imposition of truth by a government censor.
And here's what the Attorney General told our friend Tucker Carlson just minutes ago.
We have too much suppression of free and open speech on college campuses today. Particularly conservatives are being silenced in many ways. Controversial speakers are being blocked. You have the veto by the heckler who threatens to protest and disrupt the speech, so the college may withdraw the speaker's invitation so there won't be a disturbance. These kind of things really threaten the entire educational system, in my view, the integrity of it.
Joining us now for a reaction in Washington is Guy Benson, a Fox News contributor and political editor at townhall.com, and Charlie Hurt, also a Fox News contributor as well as opinion editor for the Washington Times. Now, Guy, you wrote a book called End of Discussion, and I wondered if today this was sort of music to your ears.
It was, and thanks for the plug. And in fact, I'll return one right at you. Congratulations on the new show.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait to watch starting next week at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we'll stay tuned for that for sure.
There will be no end of discussion on that show.
There will not. There'll be a discussion every day, and I was really excited. I got an advance copy of the speech from the Attorney General's office yesterday, and as I was scrolling through it, I was just nodding throughout. This is exactly right. His message and his tone was correct. To their credit, the people at Georgetown let him speak, did not shout him down. There were some quiet protesters, but this is a message that has to be heard, and it's encouraging hearing top-level government officials standing up for a bedrock American principle, especially on college campuses, which ought to be hotbeds of discussion and debate as opposed to monolithic thinking and silencing.
And something that was kind of new today, Charlie, you know, we've had people talk about the importance of being able to speak freely on campus, and the president's talked about it. But what was different, and what I noticed, is that the Attorney General said that the U.S. Justice Department would weigh in with students who were saying that they were basically the target of being allowed to speak because possibly because of their conservative views. To me, that was a step that governments haven't taken before.
Sure. And it's high time that they do take a step like that, because what we're talking about is a constitutional right. And this constitutional right has been trampled from coast to coast. Sadly and ironically, it's on college campuses. You know, when I think of college, I think of a place where a youngster is supposed to go and grow and learn and be challenged and be threatened with new ideas and be forced to make arguments against ideas that they disagree with, and sometimes even forced to make arguments that they don't even agree with in order to hone their skills of being able to make arguments in a free society. And yet, at all of these and the most premier college campuses around the country, we have the exact opposite. We have the infantilization of these campuses where this is just snuffed out to the point where Guy is commending the Georgetown people for orderly allowing them to speak. It's terrifying, and I think about Thomas Jefferson and what he must
if he could see us now.
Yeah, they thought about all of this, and why it mattered to them is not because they cared about higher education, but because they cared about self-governance, and they knew that you couldn't have self-governance without higher education and intelligent, informed
people.
What's
interesting to me too, Guy, is that for years this was sort of just talked about in sort of the small places like the Washington Times, National Review, Weekly Standard, but now this is actually being talked about everywhere, and partly that is social media, but also is the problem just so much worse?
Yeah, it does certainly feel like it's getting worse, Dana. And I think, when you talk about private institutions, they have a right to do whatever they want, basically, on this front. I think administrations across the board should stand up for First Amendment rights. But when it's a government school, a public institution, I think there is a government interest to make sure that fundamental constitutional liberties of citizens are protected. And where a school, which are agents of the government in the cases of public schools, if they are unwilling or unable to do so, I think the government has an interest to step in on some level, not micromanage and not get too involved, but to say, this isn't right. And one example briefly that I would give, Dana, it's not just the shouting down and the rioting, for example, that we've seen in Berkeley. It's colleges charging conservative groups much more exorbitant fees for security that they don't charge to other groups. Their speech is less free, literally.
I got a call last night, Charlie. We'll give you the last word on this. So I got a call last night from a young woman. She was a college associate here at Fox News. I think she's amazing. I will not name the college that she goes to now, but let's just say it's a very prominent journalism school. She had set up an interview with a prominent political figure that was coming to campus. She went to her advisor, or the professor, to just basically ask for some guidance and advice. And he got to know her a little bit, and he found out that she had worked at Fox News. And he lost it, told her that she'd have to go somewhere else for help, said everybody that worked at Fox should be incarcerated. And she called me just saying, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, first of all, I'm sure your parents, who pay a lot for that tuition, aren't very happy, but I encouraged her to go see the dean. As you're a parent of several children, what would you have her do?
I would make a huge stink about it. I would do everything I could to encourage her to make a big stink about it. And this is not just a good idea. The federal government has a responsibility to protect our. It's one of the few things they really have to do to protect our First Amendment rights. And when I look around and see all the stupid, silly arguments we're having in this country today, I can't help but think if those stupid, silly arguments aren't kind of an offshoot of all of these people who went to these safe space colleges and actually really came out believing that, oh, you're not allowed to think that, you're not allowed to say that, I'm right about everything and everyone else be damned.
Well, by the way, this professor said that everyone who works here should be incarcerated?
Apparently so. I'm not sure what the charge is.
Lock her up.
I'll tell you what, I told her that she should go to the dean, but I also told her to do the interview that she had set up and to knock their socks off, and I hope she did.
There you go.
All right, Guy, Charlie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana.
Up next, a stunning new poll about free speech. Stay with us. The story of the week so far has been President Trump's very public opposition to NFL players kneeling during the national anthem. A Harvard-Harris poll sheds some light on how Americans may feel about the issue. According to the poll, 85% of registered voters believe people should be protected from being fired for their political views. Joining us now is the man who conducted that poll, the chairman of the Harris poll, Mark Penn, and a good friend of mine. So tell me about this poll. It shouldn't be a surprise. I'm just surprised it's not 100% don't think this.
Well, I think there's a huge gap in the First Amendment. I think people are always talking about the First Amendment, and they don't realize that it doesn't apply to employers. So you can go out and say you're from Trump or you're for Hillary, and your employer can say you're fired.
Right.
And so it's a huge gap. And today with social media, what's happening is employers are kind of pressured into firing people. And when you see 85% say you should not be fired for your political views.
So there's some controversy about President Trump calling for the NFL managers to fire anybody who was kneeling for the national anthem. Did that go too far?
Well,
Or would people agree with that?
there's one poll that came out so far, an Ipsos Reuters poll, that says 7 or 8% think you shouldn't be fired from the NFL. But about the same number says they should stand.
They should stand.
So it's a kind of a standoff on this thing, because Trump went a little too far in saying fire them when he should have just stuck to the ground that people believe.
You're an expert in crisis communications. We used to work together for a hot minute. Let me ask you, how would you advise the country or the NFL to get past this? Like, what do they need to do? Is it important that they try to solve this in the next few days?
Well, the first thing the commissioner should have done is just call the president. He probably had a good relationship. He should have tried to explain, we've got to balance the players and the fans and the country. And I think now they've got to look for a solution. He's got to get to the White House, or Trump's got to get to the field. The country can't take more division like this. Whether the president is right or not, the country doesn't want division.
I love that idea. The president should go to a game this weekend, and they could all stand together, and the country can feel good again and watch football. Are the Democrats overreacting, though, to the president on this?
I don't think they're overreacting. No? He laid down a gauntlet, and I think they picked it up. And I think that's what he expected. That's kind of what everybody wants out of this thing. Look, in a world of division, the surprising thing is about 80 or more than 80% really supported the president coming to an agreement with the Democrats.
I know.
Right? They want to see bipartisanship.
Right.
But when you throw down something like this, everybody goes to their corner. And I think probably Trump helped more when he kind of threw down this kind of divisive item.
When you say that everyone goes to their corners, so the right is feeling pretty good about itself in some cases, but I read today in the Washington Post that the left groups are just raking in the cash. Like they don't even know how to spend all this money.
Well, let's just say polarization kind of benefits both sides. That's the whole point of polarization.
But it doesn't benefit.
Right? My wife has a group, No Labels, right?
Yep.
And I think the center and also people who want bipartisanship, they have a role too. I think everybody now is going to get involved.
Your wife is finally being vindicated on the No Labels. Because people have sort of said that in the past, where you saw polls saying people really want bipartisanship. Before I let you go, I got to ask you this. Former Vice President Joe Biden, he's starting to get out there a little bit more. He's going to start a daily podcast. I guess it's going to detail his favorite news articles of the day. Is he gearing up to run in 2020?
I saw him speak recently to a group of executives. He did an excellent job. He had a very measured message. He was ready. He's a couple of years older than Trump, but I thought he was fit and ready to go. So I would not be surprised at all if he's at least thinking about it and making sure he's well positioned.
And if Biden is thinking about that, will he be able to prevent the Democratic Party from going so far left to the Bernie Sanders wing of the party?
Well, that's his challenge. But Biden will say, look, I can get those working class voters back. So
the Trump voters.
Right. I can get them back. They voted for Obama. They'll vote for me. I'm your ticket out. If you go with Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, you'll be too far to the left. You will lose. He probably is right.
Very interesting. All right, Mark, thank you for being here, and good luck on the rollout of the poll in the morning.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, President Trump's new threat of military action against North Korea, with the rogue state now reportedly bulking up its defenses. We'll be back in a moment. President Trump today doubling down on his assertion that the military option is on the table when it comes to the North Korean menace.
We are totally prepared for the second option, not a preferred option. But if we take that option, it will be devastating. I can tell you that. Devastating for North Korea. That's called the military option. If we have to take it, we will. North Korea is a situation that should have been handled 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, and it could have been handled much more easily. You had various administrations, many administrations, which left me a mess. But I'll fix the mess.
Meanwhile, the parents of Otto Warmbier, the American student who died in June after apparently being tortured while imprisoned in North Korea, bravely shared their thoughts about their son's ordeal this morning on Fox and Friends.
North Korea is not a victim. They're terrorists.
They destroyed him.
They purposely and intentionally injured Otto.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington is Jillian Turner, former National Security Council staffer during the Bush and Obama administrations. Jillian, I thought that was so courageous of the Warmbiers to come forward to describe that, because their pain is so raw and real. And it helps people understand the kind of rogue leader, the hideousness that is Kim Jong-un. What do you make of them coming forward? Does that help galvanize support for President Trump's pretty harsh rhetoric, even though I know that you think that maybe he's gone a little too far?
I think it does. It was a heartbreaking, gut-wrenching interview to watch this morning on Fox and Friends, but at the same time it was, like you said, incredibly important for the American people to hear this. I think we don't get many glimpses inside North Korea, period, especially inside the regime and the way that it treats people they consider to be enemies of the state. This was really like a first-hand account, a real glimpse inside that horror show, and it was just incredibly moving. I think it will absolutely galvanize support for President Trump.
So President Trump, at every point, has been trying to either answer questions or to make a comment, and I think that what he is trying to do is to make sure that Kim Jong-un is listening to him and getting it directly. But from your experience, I could imagine you would expect that there are lots of different communications taking place from the CIA, from the Defense Department, from the State Department, and then you have the President and possibly others, including China. How do you think that sort of coordination is going, and where do you think it's headed next?
Well, it seems like every day for virtually the last month or so, the tension in terms of the rhetorical stuff has escalated on a daily basis. I think most of that has been the provocations of Kim Jong-un, and then President Trump has been responding to that. He's right. He took great care to point that out today in his press conference. He said, look, they're issuing statements and we're responding. We're not generating this stuff. And he has a point, right? I mean, I think he's operating on this fundamental, not to go all pop psychology on you, but I think he's operating on this fundamental principle, right, that bullies should be responded to with bullying, and that, threats of force should be responded to with threats of force, because he's so frustrated at the way, I guess, previous administrations responded to this regime. So he's trying something else. I have some hope, and I hope for the country's sake that it ultimately is more effective rather than, it's quite risky. It could go the other way.
But he's not dealing with North Korea in a vacuum. There is also this upcoming decision about the Iran deal that has to take place, I guess, by October 15th under the law. That President Trump is again faced with, does he certify that Iran is in compliance or not, and the consequences of that, etc. I think that this is a big calculation when it comes to North Korea. What do you think?
Probably. And, the Europeans in the last few weeks have really put the pressure on President Trump when it comes to getting together some kind of a coalition, whether it looks like the six-party talks, the P5+1, whatever, to negotiate on North Korea. It's something that people like, German Chancellor Merkel and the French have really been pressing President Trump pretty hard on. So he faces this stark choice of, is he going to have the United States be a party to this if some kind of formal negotiation breaks out in the next few months? And that's going to be a really hard decision for him to make.
We'll be watching for that, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you more. Jillian, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana.
Straight ahead, we head live to Alabama for an update on tonight's big Senate race. Don't go away. As we reported at the top of the hour, Roy Moore has won the Alabama Senate Republican primary over Senator Luther Strange. Here's what Judge Moore said just moments ago.
Together we can make America great. We can support the president. Don't let anybody in the press think that because he supported my opponent that I do not support him and support his agenda. As long as it's constitutional, as long as it advances our society, our culture, our country, I will be supportive.
Let's bring in John McCormick, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, along with Aaron McPite, White House correspondent for the Independent Journal Review. Both join us from Washington, and I'm so glad that you did, because big news tonight. I mean, it feels like this election cycle actually never ends. John, tonight we expected this, I guess, in the last few days, that Roy Moore would be able to win. And it seems like Luther Strange just said, here, great concession speech, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, a win for the polling industry. The polls were showing a significant size win for Roy Moore, and that's just what he got. You've heard a lot among pundits saying that this would be a big loss for Donald Trump to go down there, campaign, and not pull through for his candidate. I don't really think that's the case. Because
doesn't seem like it.
It was basically both candidates falling over themselves about who liked Donald Trump more, who was more like Donald Trump, who could help Donald Trump get the job done in Washington, D.C. It would have been a huge win for the president, big upside if he could have closed that, double-digit gap. But I don't think it was that big of a problem that Roy Moore ended up winning for the president.
Wasn't it interesting, Aaron, to see how the voters there in Alabama, overwhelmingly who support the president, didn't see that there was any problem with choosing to vote for the opponent, Roy Moore, over Luther Strange, because they thought that regardless that they're going to support the president. I don't know if that could actually happen in any other state.
Well, right. And look, Steve Bannon obviously made this a lot about Mitch McConnell, and I thought some of the most startling, toxic language that Steve Bannon used on Monday night was basically saying of Mitch McConnell and other Republican leaders to the voters in Alabama, they think you're a pack of morons. They think you're a bunch of rubes. I think you're going to see a lot more of that from Bannon in Republican primaries next year. And I would point out, too, this is obviously not going to affect the math in the Senate. But think about what happened in Colorado today. That was Mike Coffman, the Republican moderate congressman who was running for governor, calling for Tom Tancredo to challenge him in that primary to do battle over the soul of the Republican Party. It will be interesting to see if McConnell and others do a little bit more of what Mike Coffman did, trying to battle back from the kind of language that Steve Bannon is using, because it's unclear what it is that Steve Bannon wants other than to just tear down the establishment.
It's actually interesting, Aaron. I hadn't heard that about Colorado, and I'm from Colorado, so I feel like I should have done. We're going to keep you for one more block, but before I let you go on this particular topic, do you think that, John, that what we are looking at for the NRSC is a problem tonight when you look at the fact that there's a split amongst the Republican Party, or will it be able to keep the good map that it has, at least for 2018?
This problem has been there for a long time. There's been this populist conservative backlash going on at least since 2010, and the same backlash that gave us people like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Mike Lee, it also produced some candidates like Sharon Angle and Todd Aiken, who were big flops and caused a lot of problems for the party with their outlandish comments. Christine O'Donnell. And, Judge Moore, he definitely seems to be more like a Christine O'Donnell. Now, whether that will actually drag down other Senate candidates, I'm not so sure. I think that the president is going to take up all the oxygen in the room, and that whatever outlandish things Roy Moore says, that Donald Trump's comments are going to be.
However, unlike in Delaware, I think Roy Moore is going to win this election in Alabama. All right, stay right there. We're going to be right back with more with John and Aaron right after this. Welcome back. We continue our discussion with John McCormick, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, along with Aaron McPike. She's White House correspondent for the Independent Journal Review. Let me start with you, Aaron. I'm curious your thoughts about the failure of health care for the Republicans this week and the birth of the tax reform effort, which happens tomorrow. Why do they seem so optimistic that tax reform is going to have a better fate than health care?
Part of that is because they've been working behind the scenes to come up with some kind of compromise. And I've been hearing that for months, that they're farther along, and they continue to be farther along than people realize. Obviously, Speaker Ryan has been saying a lot about that. But look, on health care, we did hear Lindsey Graham said that they're going to come back to that again after tax reform. Maybe they get to it in the budget process next year as well.
Yeah, John, can they really? Even if they don't fully repeal and replace Obamacare, there are certainly fixes that have to be done, and there's regular order of business. And tax reform, they say it hasn't been done in 30 years, but I have to tell you, I feel like it actually could get done as well. What do you think?
Well, there are two different things that are under consideration right now. One would be some sort of, bipartisan bailout. Maybe you don't want to call it that, a stabilization fund. The other would be...
Let me take it from me. They don't want to call it that. I have scars from 2008.
And the other option would be to actually include health care, something like this Graham-Cassidy plan to block grant most of the Obamacare funds back to the states with tax reform. Now, tax reform is very difficult, but the advocates of this last just Obamacare plan that just failed, they say that, listen, you know, two of these people, John McCain and Lisa Murkowski, they were opposed because of process. And so if we can just keep the process going, maybe it'll work. Now, this is a long shot. I don't think there's really much hope there, but that's what the advocates of this bill are pushing for.
What do you expect to hear from the president tomorrow, Aaron, when he travels to Indiana to talk about his tax reform push?
Well, honestly, I think that's the big question, because he has not said a whole lot about this, and we were expecting plans to come out from the administration on tax reform months and months and months ago. You remember that Secretary Mnuchin said earlier this year that he wanted it done by August. And obviously the administration has been a little bit mum on this. So I think we'll hear a lot more. I mean, obviously he was talking about the NFL and all kinds of other things the last couple of days. If anything, that has put more on just more pressure on this announcement tomorrow to talk about whatever kind of numbers he wants to get out of this plan.
John, do you think that Republicans are going to sort of set aside what had been something they've been used for years, which is that the budget needs to be revenue neutral if they want to get this tax reform bill done?
I think so. I mean, this is going to lose revenue over the short term. There will be some tax cuts that would have to be renewed at the end of 10 years due to the budget rules here. But I think they just want to get a win. I think that after the failure of healthcare, they look back at these last 9 months and think, man, we need some accomplishment to go back to voters and say, you elected us for